Hello, everybody. My name is Graham Elwood, and you're watching The Political Vigilante. I am here with libertarian running for Congress in New York's 14th, which is AOC's district, Jonathan Howe. Jonathan, so first of all, what made you decide to run against AOC?
Well, I can't really run anywhere else because I live here.
Oh,
but the main reason would be, I mean, I've always been into politics. I've always been a libertarian. And I always said, doom is coming. They're going to lock us in our homes. They're going to shut down the country. And then they did it. So I said, now is the time. I'm running where I live. So it has to happen now. We have gotten to the point of no return. I've been warning that we would get to the point of no return for a long time, and people called me crazy, and then they locked down the country. And I'll just add, I'm a public defender. I'm a lawyer. I have a pretty good job. I'm very, very happy with it. Lockdown was great for me. I got married. Get in the camera there. I got married. I started adopting cats. Got them on the tie here from a tie that my wife made. All these great things. I don't have to commute anymore. I still work from my bed every day. So I save hundreds of dollars a month going out, getting on the train. But for my clients and for people who are like my clients, for people who are in a different socioeconomic category, it's been hell. It's been absolute hell. And it continues to be hell. And when AOC ran, she said that this is about, class and race and all those things, that she's done absolutely nothing to stop what's going on here. In fact, she supported it. It's just been a complete and utter disappointment. I loved that she was running to challenge the establishment, and then immediately she gave up on that. And she's become just a part of the establishment who's a good advertisement.
So, like, when you say like point of no return and AOC hasn't done a lot of things. I mean, I agree. Yeah, I was excited when she won, and I thought, oh man, this is what we need. And she's pretty much acquiesced to the corporate Democrats. And I don't see how you can reform that party, the Democrats or the Republicans either. You can't reform either one of those parties from within. It's just not really that feasible unless you're willing to do what the Tea Party did, which is just threaten to walk. I mean, Paula Jean Swearengin is the only one that's like left the Democratic Party. But what specifically do you think AOC should have passed that isn't passing and that you would do if you were in Congress?
Well, the one thing that really was the trigger was the CARES Act and all the bailouts, the largest upward transfer of wealth in any of our lifetimes, really in any lifetime outside of a violent conflict. And she first, played around with whether she had voted for it or not. And then 2 weeks later said, oh, I didn't vote for it, but then voted for all the rest. And it was the largest upward transfer of wealth in any of our lifetimes. And she voted for that. But as far as other things she hasn't done, I mean, you and Jimmy Dore were big on the whole force the vote thing, right? Mm-hmm. And you were talking about we have to force the vote so we can have a floor vote for Medicare for all. And we could have said, oh, it won't pass, so what's the point? I know that was what some people were saying, but it could have been about anything. It didn't have to be about Medicare for all. They could have said, we want to legalize marijuana on the federal level, or we won't vote for Nancy Pelosi. It could have been, we want to stop giving weapons to Saudi Arabia to bomb Yemen, or we won't vote for Nancy Pelosi. All these great things they could have done with it. They could have just chosen one good thing, and they did nothing. They've had all this leverage, all this time, and they've done absolutely nothing with it.
So you're running as a libertarian, and you told me in your email that you're pro-environment.
Oh, yeah.
So I respect a lot of libertarians because you've chosen to get outside of the two-party system. I consider myself a libertarian a long time ago in the 90s. But then the issue that I think I have with libertarians is this whole no taxes, no government stance. I know I'm very generalizing here, but
that's how people are going to see me when I say the word libertarian. So
okay. Yeah. So, and while I'm not a huge fan of big bureaucracies, I don't see a solution for the climate collapse that we're in without it. It's one of the few places where we got to have a top-down solution. I'm all for grassroots. I'm all for circumventing electoral politics, but I don't know how we solve this imminent threat. It's as though there's a meteor coming to the planet that's going to take us all out without big top-down solutions. So how do you reconcile that? I mean, that was one of the things that I also think is a disappointment with AOC. She ran on a Green New Deal, right? A real one that would transition people from, fossil fuel jobs into green energy. It would give people more work, and Medicare for all would be part of that. Free student college would be part of that. But that's big government. I mean, that's big government writing huge, $1 trillion checks to pay for all that. So how do you see this? You call yourself a libertarian, and so how do you see these solutions? You're also for the environment.
Well, I used to believe that the libertarians were right about everything. I'm right about everything except the environment, and so that was my one exception. And then I came around, and I'll explain that. So we know who writes the Green New Deal that we saw. It's campaign managers. It's people who are trying to market. But we also know who actually writes the bills in Congress. It is not the campaign managers. It's not the politicians. It's the corporate interests. Always. I cannot find an example in my lifetime where any major change has not been written by the corporate interest behind it. And I don't see why we would expect it to be any different with climate change. Now, maybe there is a top-down solution. Maybe there is a way that we could get a plan and we could do it from there. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. And if it does happen, I have a feeling that it will just be a placeholder. It will not be something that actually makes any real change. And so I think there's an alternative that you can also do in conjunction. And that's giving people back their bodily autonomy and their private property rights. If you are polluting, let's say you're putting something out into the air, and it comes into my yard. Let's say I actually owned a place. I'm in New York City, so obviously I don't. But it comes into my yard. You've trespassed on my property. Let's start treating it like that. It used to be treated like that. It used to be that if you dump something on your neighbor's lawn, you were trespassing. And if you dump something on their neighbor's lawn and it gets into their body, you just assaulted them. If I point a gun at you and pull the trigger and I put a foreign object in your body that kills you, we know what that is. And yet somehow we don't treat pollution like that. And you notice that I'm not saying climate change, because I'm trying to appeal to both sides. It doesn't matter if you believe in climate change. I do. I obviously think that humans are changing the climate, but it doesn't matter if you do. I have a glass of water here. This is filled with microplastics. I filled it up from my sink. Yours is too. Probably everyone's here is. It filled with microplastics. It's filled with prescription medicine. It's filled with all types of carcinogens, even the nice, clean, filtered water that we have here in New York. And so if we just start treating people who are essentially assaulting you and trespassing on your property every day, like they are doing that, I think that you address the problem from the ground up. One thing you have to reform is the corporate system. Corporations are essentially government entities. We've given them so much protection. They're not really part of a free market. If you're a corporate executive and you choose to take an action that you know reasonably will harm people, you're not in any danger. You're not going to jail. You're not being fined. Now, ExxonMobil might get a few $100 million in fines. Okay, now you're the CEO of ExxonMobil, you don't go to jail, stock price goes down a little bit. But isn't it convenient that the way that you invest pre-tax money in the United States is by buying big funds that have ExxonMobil in them, they have Apple in them, they have Facebook in them. So if you want to retire the way we're supposed to retire, the way that every financial advisor will tell you, you're supporting all these people, the people who are hurting us and getting away unscathed. Not only are they getting away unscathed, we're funding them from our paychecks every week. If you have a 401k, if you have a 403b, you are essentially part of propping them up forever so that they can always be, infringing on other people's rights. And so we may be able to do a top-down way and a bottom-up way at the same time. I've term limited myself to 4 years, so I'm not going to run for re-election more than one time. I call on everyone running to do the same thing. I will obviously vote for term limits, but I think that would require a change to the Constitution. So I don't think I'm going to completely tear down the corporate system in 4 years, or that I'm going to completely solve the climate crisis in 4 years. But if we can show people that there's an incentive for individuals to hold the companies accountable, I think that would be a huge step forward. Maybe something in the future could be something like a public defender's office, but for victims of environmental crime, who could sue those people, and then the prosecutor could go after the executives. I don't know. Again, I don't see that happening in 4 years, but we have to start moving in that direction in some way, and reducing corporate power, reducing corporate protections, and putting the incentives that the rest of us all face onto them.
So what you're saying then, as a lawyer, and this is an interesting angle, that you think that going after them legally, the corporations, the big polluters, with regard to the environment, is the way to go, because as you said, you made this very compelling case of if I threw trash in your backyard and you or your family consumed that trash and got sick and died, I would be held accountable. And so we should do that. We should be prosecuting these CEOs of the companies like ExxonMobil and Shell and putting them behind bars, rather than just rich guys writing big checks and going back on their yachts. So how do we do that legally, since the laws are right now stacked, as you said, in favor of the corporations?
Well, I mean, I have long seen this as the solution, and that's why I have to run for Congress to make that change. We have to change the laws. We have to reduce corporate protections. They get an outrageous amount of protection. It's called a limited liability company for a reason. Your liability is limited. It's just financial. It's just to the business. Now, I'm not a business lawyer. I'm about as far from it as you can possibly be. But I did take business law, and I'm sure I could figure it out once I get there which specific laws are the ones protecting corporations. But the term of art is piercing the corporate veil. We need to make it much easier to pierce the corporate veil. When people start seeing, even if we just make a minor change and it has some minor positive outcome, people will start seeing, oh, this is the way we can do it. And it's very rare for me to call for anyone to go to jail, given what I do for a living, and that I don't believe in jail for 99% of the stuff that we put people in jail for. But I mean, this is on the mass scale. When you're dumping oil into the Gulf, and hundreds of thousands, millions of people are affected, and their livelihoods are destroyed, and people are eating shrimp covered in oil. The BP CEO came to America and did an apology to her. He should have been in jail. Like, there's absolutely no question. And we're just so conditioned to just be like, oh, well, the business messed up and he's here to apologize and make amends. No, they knowingly took risks with that. We need to make it much easier to hold them accountable. There's many different ways you can do it from the bottom up, but we have to start somewhere.
Is there a way, at least from looking at the bottom up avenue, of getting local prosecutors to start, in the example, because it just popped in mind when you're talking about what BP did. It was 2012, I think, when they polluted, and they just did apology tour, and they did these horrible greenwashing commercials like, we're doing our part. Your part, you started this thing. Like, your part, it's unbelievable. It's just like Pablo Escobar going, I'm doing my part to keep kids off of drugs. Like, shut up. It's ridiculous. Like, can local prosecutors start charging? Because somebody dies as a result of this pollution. Or even, again, a fisherman loses his business, his livelihood's gone because the Gulf of Mexico is polluted or whatever, to where local prosecutors would be willing to, like, file a murder charge, file a reckless endangerment charge against the CEO, not the corporate veil, but like you say, like the corporate entity, but the CEO, and start holding them accountable. Is there any... I mean, obviously, I know you don't know the law of every state and city in this country because it varies, but is that possible? Is there a way, a grassroots rate, to start, like, getting some prosecutors, some local prosecutors, some local DAs or states attorneys generals to start doing this?
I think that's one of the options that we absolutely have to start doing. I think that's the exact way to do it. If I went out to the middle of the Gulf of Mexico with a shovel and I just dug down until I hit oil and sprayed it all over the Gulf of Mexico, that's what would happen to me. Someone would charge me with a crime. I would be in jail now. That's the bottom line. But because it's a corporation, because they've filled out their forms and they got it approved by the government and everything was, within spec, that's not happening. And right now it would be very hard for a prosecutor to win one of those because of the way that the corporate law is set up. That there's many layers between you and the actual harm done. So that would be the objective, is making that easier, because that's exactly what needs to happen. The federal government has no incentive to make sure that area is cleaned up and people are healthy. There's no reason for it. Right. The people there have every incentive to make sure that area is cleaned up and that they are healthy. And people respond to incentives.
Yeah. Also, too, libertarians in general are pretty, like, against big taxes. And of course, the first thing to go from this infrastructure and Build Back Better thing was taxes on billionaires. Both parties agreed on that. It's weird. Both parties that are funded by billionaires are like, we can't tax the people that pay our bills. So where do you, as a libertarian, stand on, corporate tax and taxing of billionaires? And also, again, with regards to climate, couldn't we, like, not only just try to put the CEO of BP, we'll stick with this example of that specific crime that was committed, the CEO of BP put in jail, but also then levy massive taxes on these companies, not just fines, but like massive taxes on top of that, like a dirty energy tax. You know, like if you want to make clean energy, you get a tax break. You want to do fossil fuels? Great. There's a huge dirty tax on that now. Just like if you want to buy cigarettes, you know, like, what do you think of that?
I think that taxation is theft, essentially. If you're just working for a living and the government is taking your money, that's theft. Now, if you're a corporation and you've gotten all these benefits from the government, like limited liability, for example, and even if we are going to break down the veil, they're still going to have benefits, benefits in how they do their accounting, benefits in how they do all that type of stuff. So for a corporation, I don't see a problem with a corporate tax because it's an exchange. You get these protections, you pay these taxes. So I think that's fair. As far as like a dirty pollution tax, I mean, that's what, in theory, we would open up the courts for, so that they'd be charged enough that it wouldn't happen. And it's not the best example to compare it to, but I love the case, the hot coffee case, where the old lady ordered a coffee and everyone's like, oh, she sued McDonald's because the coffee was too hot. Like, what a whiner. Like, she got all this money. It's not fair. Really, she had third-degree burns over huge portions of her body, including her groin. She was not driving when it happened. And she sued and she won all this money. It was compensatory damages to make up for like the medical bills. And then it was punitive damages to punish McDonald's for doing that. And what the court ended up doing on appeal is reducing the punitive damages down by a massive amount. So instead of getting this huge thing that not only would make her whole, but also punish McDonald's, they said, oh, no, you can't have punitive damages that high. So punitive damages need to be the thing. And not only that, but I think punitive damages should not be based on the compensatory damages, that the actual harm done to the individual. It should be based on a percentage of the company's value. So $1 million fine for McDonald's means nothing. $1 million fine for the guy across the street selling coffee, obviously puts them under forever. So it should be based on a percentage. If you do X amount of harm, we need a way to start quantifying that. And it should not be connected to the amount of harm done when the point is punitive. And again, I'm not big on punitive. I don't like when my clients are being treated punitively. But if you've harmed someone and you thought you could get away with it, this is how you stop people from thinking that. Okay.
So I've done numerous videos and had a lot of MMT people. I have an old MMT playlist about, we've talked about how taxation is theft because the federal government can just sort of pay for whatever it wants. So how do you see then, like, this is where I typically have problems with libertarians, because how do we deal with all these socials? Like, what's going to fund the social services that we desperately need? I'm all for Housing First, a program they did in Finland. And it's proven actually to be cheaper than how we currently treat our homeless now. I think free college should be free, like it's been free in Europe for 60, 70 years. I think because we need an educated electorate. It's by design that we don't have an educated electorate, because they're easily scared and split into this red state, blue state shit. We need Medicare for all. We need all of these things that countries have had for decades. And in many of those countries, people go, yeah, but look at the tax rate in Sweden or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but they get something for their taxes. I mean, like, I'm willing to pay. I don't want to give up my paycheck to the government so they can bomb poor countries and sanction countries that don't want to give up and stage coups in Nicaragua and places like this and let the CIA do whatever the hell they want. I don't want to give my taxes to give corporate bailouts when both parties let the banks steal my home. Personally, they let them steal my home.
I remember that. I believe when you told that story on Jimmy Dore's show at one point, that's when I was like, who is this guy? I like him. And then I went to your channel and subscribed. And it's a perfect example of it. It's a perfect example of, I always say I won't talk about the Federal Reserve for my entire interview, but I'm about to jump into it now. I always recommend people go to WTFhappenedin1971.com. Two things happened in 1971. One, the Libertarian Party formed, and we were against the drug war then. So just throwing that out there. The other thing, we got off the gold standard. And not only did we get off the gold standard, but we were the world power. And so everyone had to accept and hold and have our currency, and we could just print as much as we wanted. There's a reason why when the government started helping people go to college in Europe and in South America and in other parts of the world, that the prices didn't go bananas. They went up, but they didn't go bananas like they did here. Because here, when the government gets in, it's constant influx of cash, and there's no reason not to raise prices. So in the US, where we have just been printing like mad, what is the effect of printing money? The money goes into things, right? It goes into assets. People invest it in assets. Now, if you're an asset owner, that's great. If you own a lot of stuff, whether it's stock or property or anything, the value of your stuff goes up. That's what inflation is. If you're a salary worker, and I'm in that category. If you're a salary worker, I got a 2% raise this year. Great. Okay, inflation is 6%. I just lost 4%. I don't have enough, assets. I have a few stocks here and there, but I don't have enough assets for that to be offset. And most people who work for a wage don't. And so for 50 years straight, it's essentially been a tax only on the poor, only on salaried workers or on wage workers, and a huge benefit for executives at companies who have a lot of stock, large landowners, anyone like that. And if you look at the charts that are on WTF happened in 1971, you can see where, for a while, productivity and wages went like this. And then in 1971, And that's because we allowed ourselves to just print like crazy. And it'd be one thing if it was MMT, and they printed like crazy and gave it to everybody. That's one thing. I still don't think that would work, but it would make a lot more sense of what we do, which we print a ton of money and we give it only to the largest banks so that their interest rates go lower. So they feel risky lending to little people, so they only lend to the largest companies. And we see that happening right now. I mean, I don't own a home, but if I were to take out debt, I would be, swiping my card, paying 18% interest if I can't pay it all off. BlackRock is borrowing billions of dollars at 1% and buying all of our houses. And it has been like that forever. It's just that since 1971 at least, but when we got to like the 0% interest rates, and it just completely diverged, and they're now just going completely crazy with it. Why would you not borrow money and buy all you could at 1%? You don't think you can make 2% a year? Like you're making a profit then. So why not? And you control all these properties, which are going to go up in value because the Federal Reserve is going to keep printing money. Now you asked me about funding a lot of stuff. A lot of that stuff wouldn't need to be funded if this hadn't been happening. For example, most people, when my dad went to college or my mom went to college, didn't need to take out a loan. It was a few $100. The increase in college prices is far outpaced by the increase in all other prices, even though those have skyrocketed as well, as I just ranted about. But the same thing with healthcare. The same thing with anything that the government really gets its hands into, the prices go up. So I'm definitely not against the social safety net. I think that's one of the actual roles of government. And I'm not opposed to, loans for people who can't afford to go to college. But when we're constantly printing money and constantly putting it into loans, and by the way, those loans benefit the banks that make them, not the government. When we constantly keep printing out money and guaranteeing it, that's what's increasing the demand so much, which increases the price so much. How many people do you know with a completely useless degree and they just went to college because everyone said that they had to, and now they're tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt? And that's what the government has encouraged. People respond to incentives. You can have all this money and you can go have fun for 4 years, and it's the only way to get a job. Now do it. And you tell everyone that, and you make it completely, the easiest thing in the world to take out hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt as an 18-year-old. I mean, I'm very, very lucky. I grew up in a family that was well off. My dad is a doctor. I'm extremely lucky. I got a half scholarship and he paid for the rest. Now, most people in the whole country can't say that. And the price that he paid for one semester was more than he paid for all of his years of college, be it college and medical school. So you asked me a lot of questions about that, and I just kind of ranted about the Federal Reserve and inflation. But that's my short answer, is that the more you back the government off and hold individuals responsible and give individuals freedom, I think those prices come down to the point where you don't necessarily need as much government involvement.
Well, I mean, I think that's true up to a point. I agree with you up to a point in terms of the middle class. And back when college was, $500 a semester, $1,000 a semester, like it was like in the state of California, at very low rates for college, you still were kind of somebody not born even into the middle class or working class. and again, there's a lot of issues here, which you're bringing up, and this is valid, of like when, if minimum wage went up according to inflation and according to what CEOs were making, minimum wage right now would be about $25 an hour.
And that's with official inflation numbers.
Right.
I think with realistic inflation numbers, it would be even higher.
Right. And so what you're saying is if there's enough of those jobs, and if college was only, $500 a semester, then the $25 or $1,000 a semester, whatever, then the $25 an hour minimum wage person could afford to go to college. I still think, and then you're saying they have low interest loans and to get people, I don't know. I just think it should be free personally. But
I think that would be a valid thing for states to do, to make their public universities free. I mean, we've all done that here in New York. I think that's a totally fine idea. I don't think it's a great idea for the federal government to just be saying you can go to any college you want and we will give you all the money that you need, because that drives prices up and it puts people into horrible debt.
Okay, that's a valid argument.
To the tax burden to make the universities free, on my list of priorities, that's not one that I would fight back against. Let's put it that way.
Right. Public colleges and universities, yes, should be free. And you want to go to a fancier school, you can pay the price. But I mean, it's just, I get kind of bothered when you hear about like these Ivy League, like Harvard has a multi-billion-dollar, and they have all this money, and then they don't even need the tuition. They pay their staff poorly. I mean, you got Columbia University just went on strike, or I don't know where the status of that strike is, but I know some of the employees went on strike. But I want to talk about as well, not just the social safety net, but also, not necessarily federal money, but federal money does sprinkle down to the states, but then also like infrastructure, like we just spent this big infrastructure bill, how much it will actually go to fix roads and make trains and all. Yeah, we'll see. It'll probably go to private companies, because this is the problem. Privatization. Oh, the free market will fix it. No, the free market gobbles up the money and people get screwed. But what about like the social services of like, libraries, of public transportation? Again, if you're in favor of the environment, public transportation is a component in any sort of like environmental, protecting the environment or protecting against climate collapse. And, and I understand you don't like using climate change because you want to get, you're trying to also get center right voters or libertarian voters, which I get that. Sometimes you just need to change the language to get them on board with realizing the earth is collapsing. You just got to use different language.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but they changed the language to climate change. They wanted to distract us from the fact that they're still putting a bunch of crap into all our water and our air, and just focus on one chemical and one chemical alone. It's important chemical. It's important to know that our climate is changing because of that. But I thought you did a video on it. Maybe it was some other lefty YouTuber who did a video about how Exxon and big companies got together and said we need to change the narrative from pollution to climate change, because that's easier for us. We can just say, oh, we're doing solar. Okay, we're doing solar too, so now we're climate change good. And sorry to interrupt.
That's a valid point, but like, how are we also going to pay for all these other things? Like, because a lot of infrastructure, I mean, like, and this infrastructure bill is apparently going to give money to the states, but like most of our of the infrastructure that any of us deal with on a daily basis is usually municipal infrastructure, states infrastructure. I mean, if you drive on a highway every day, okay, great. But a lot of the infrastructure that we use on a daily basis is funded by the cities and states and counties, right? So, and they can't, local governments have to budget the way you and I do. They bring in so much tax money, and that's their budget. They don't have a federal reserve. Like the state of California, state of New York can't just print a bunch of money and do whatever the hell they want. Exactly. So they are dependent upon taxes to pay for these things like roads and schools and public transportation and all those other things, libraries, fire department, police department, street cleaning, all that stuff is paid by by taxes. So what's your answer to that? I
get paid by those taxes too. I work for a private organization, but we get state funding, we get city funding, and we get private donations. Mm-hmm. So I have to include myself in there as well. I'm a service. The short answer is you kind of just do it the way you're doing it now. If we can reduce the federal income tax to zero, essentially for most of us at very least, again, term limited to 4 years. I got ration myself here. But we can reduce that limit. You can increase the sales tax, or you can increase the millionaire's tax here in New York. You can do those types of things. Public transportation. This is actually one of my big things. It is difficult to get a cab, especially out in Queens. It can take some time to get an Uber. But there used to be things, and there still are in parts of the city, just people driving around, and they put a different color door on, or they make some indication that they're there to drive you. We need to make it easier for people to do public transportation whenever they want. Go buy a bus and start a route. Like, there's people who do that in Brooklyn. They buy a big van and they go up and down Atlantic Avenue, or they buy a big van, they go up and down Flatbush Avenue. They just do that all day. They charge you $2, you get on, you get off. Allow private public transportation. Many fewer people would have cars, I believe, if we still had, that old type of cabs. We purposely limited the number of cabs in New York with the medallion system for years. And I don't know if you've seen what's happened with them. They went on a hunger strike for 2 weeks because they're all millions of dollars in debt to buy this damn medallion. And then the city let Uber come in. And so now the medallion's worthless. Actually, I don't usually endorse Republicans or Democrats, but my assemblyman, here in Queens, he was actually there on a hunger strike with him, Zorhan. If you just look up Zorhan, New York Assembly, you'll see him, and I got to give him credit for that. He's a progressive Democrat, and he went on a hunger strike with those taxi drivers. And now the solution is the city's going to give them low interest loans to help cover the debt, and they're going to limit the amount of debt. But there's still people in debt over that. Why couldn't they just show up with a car and drive people? I mean, why couldn't they? The only reason that the city limited it, many fewer people would need cars. We wouldn't need as much investment into, public buses and things like that. We would still have them, but we wouldn't need as much. And there would be more parking, there'd be more room for bikes, all of that. So it's not a panacea. It doesn't fix everything all at once, but I think that's one way to approach public transportation. But also, I wouldn't get rid of any local, as a congressman, I wouldn't be in any position to get rid of local or state taxes. They would keep collecting them, and they would keep funding them that way.
But I guess I worry about when I hear private, it's like, well, let people just, start their own bus lines or whatever. Okay, but isn't that part of the problem, is we just let a private company, and while these cab companies are private companies, they were, like you said, they were heavily regulated by the city through the medallion system. But Uber comes in, private company, and all right, they disrupt the market, but again, their drivers are getting shortchanged. The company's worth billions of dollars. Like when I hear privatization, I just like, oh no, the regular person is going to get screwed over.
You're hearing corporatization. That's what you're hearing, is corporatization. That's how you're digesting it. I'm saying me, Jonathan Howe, go out and drive my car. Not Jonathan Howe LLC, but just me, go out and drive my car. And I'm sure there's some people out there like, this is crazy. What is this guy talking about? It happens every day here. Like many people that I work with, many of my clients use these types of cab services to get around, which are totally unofficial, gray market. But you can get arrested for it. You can get fined for it. You can get in trouble for doing it, the driver. So legalize that. People who are getting screwed over by Uber, great, leave, cut out the middleman. You won't be able to use a fancy app anymore. Okay, someone can make a little competitor to it. It can't be that hard to have a GPS and have it tracked on an app at this point. They've been doing it for years. But just let people do that. Most people are traveling within their own community and just need a short ride. And if we just let people do that, I think it'd be better. No middleman, no cut to Uber, no medallion, none of that.
All right. That's valid.
And I will add, you and I agree probably 80% on like the things that we want to see happen, maybe 70% on how to do them. We need to start investing in those areas of agreement, the Libertarian Party and the various progressive parties, whether it be the Greens, who I've worked with. I campaigned for a Green candidate here for city council. He did better than all the Libertarians combined. He did better than our mayoral candidate, and she had access to 52 times as many votes, and he did better than it. Check out Edwin de Jesus. He's on Twitter. He's a good guy. He helped organize the die-in at Pfizer. He's anti-mandate. He's been going to those types of protests. And I kind of look at my libertarian friends, and I know we're kind of a new party here in New York, where I'm like, we got to get with these people. we got to figure out what they're doing right, because they're getting votes 3 times faster than us. And one of the big barriers for us is that when we go into and talk to people, they're like, oh, this is an anti-environmental, pro-corporate guy. Because when they hear libertarian, they think Rand Paul. And that is the big hill I have to get over. I'm a big Ron Paul guy, But Rand Paul has just come in and calls himself a libertarian all the time, and everyone just assumes, oh, libertarian, they want to destroy the environment, they want to dump oil in the ocean, and they hate poor people. And I don't think that's true. I mean, I think I show that I don't believe that's true, through what I do for a living and the fact that I'm running for this office and my platform. But there's a lot of people to show that to. So one of my goals is to work very closely with the Green Party. I'd like to get their endorsement. I haven't yet. But one problem here in New York is ballot access. We, the Libertarian Party, won ballot access back in 2018. We were now on the ballot. So if I wanted to run as a libertarian on the libertarian line that existed, I would need to get about 25 or 30 signatures, some percentage of all the libertarians in my district, and I'd be on the ballot. Done. Cuomo, in the middle of a lockdown, in the middle of a shutdown, changed the rules for ballot access. He changed the way you get back onto the ballot, and it all went retroactive. So we lost our ballot access. So now I have to get 1,750 signatures from my district, which I'm going to do. That's not going to be an issue. But if I wanted to run Libertarian and Green, I would have to get 1,750 signatures of both. It couldn't be the same person. I would have to go get 3,500 signatures to have a cross endorsement of me on the ballot. And what does that do? It ensures that when people see me on the ballot or when they see Edwin on the ballot, the Libertarian is going to be hesitant to vote for the Green, and the Green is going to be hesitant to vote for the Libertarian and People's Party and any of these. It's extremely difficult to make these cross endorsements, and they're doing that on purpose. Like, it's quite clear that they're doing it on purpose. The pro-war parties, the pro-drug war parties are doing everything to keep any voice that is anti-war, that's anti-corporate out of office. And this is just one of the many ways.
Yeah, I've always said that the third party should definitely work together more, because there's a lot of there could be way more unity in there than people think. So where do you stand on mandates?
I'm horrified by them.
Really?
One of the I'm vaccinated. Let me put it that way. I have not eaten indoors since September, except for one time. I won't say where. They let us in. I don't want to snitch. I haven't eaten indoors because a lot of my clients can't eat indoors. A lot of my clients are afraid to get vaccinated and get a vaccine card because they're here without documentation. A lot of my clients are afraid to do it because they know there's a history of experimenting on poor people, and they think that relates to them. And they should be afraid of that. Like that's not an unrational. I mean, you do the government secret show every week. You know that they do that stuff. They experiment on people. And so they have valid fears. And now those people cannot go into restaurants. They cannot go into the coffee shop and sit down with their coffee. They can go into the coffee shop, take it out, but they can't go in and sit down with it. They can't go to the gym. They can't go to many hospitals, won't even let them in to be treated. And the majority of people who are not vaccinated in the city, let's put it this way, are not white and are not Asian. They're mostly Black and brown people, and they're mostly from areas where, socioeconomically depressed areas. Let's put it that way. And there's good reason for that. And so all the little businesses there that were just barely hanging on after the shutdown, they're going to get crushed. But there's an additional reason. Well, there's actually two additional reasons. One, screw you. It's my body. I'll make the decision I want. If my employer one-off says we would feel safer if you were vaccinated, which is what happened, I'll evaluate it. I'll make a choice. But saying you cannot work unless you get this in your body. Let's pretend that we know that it's 100% effective and we know that the virus is 100% deadly. It would still be immoral to force someone to put something in their body. Just like I think it's immoral to stop someone from putting something in their body in relation to the drug war.
I got to push back on several of these because, first of all, it's all the problem. I mean, the low income issues; those are valid issues to bring up. But I think more of that should be concerned with the fact that there's a lot of disinformation. So yes, I do a show called Government Secrets, but we've had there's over a billion, over a billion people worldwide have now taken this vaccine, and it's been safe for 99.9% of the people who've taken it. So, including me. This is about public health. This is a public health issue because 95% of all COVID deaths are unvaccinated people. We know that if you're vaccinated, you're less likely to get it. You're less likely to spread it. So this is a public health issue, and it's not taking into the greater good. And they're like, you can't force me to what you can put into my body. I understand that's a legitimate thing to say. Like, I don't want this forced into my body. but we have mandates all the time. Many of the people I'm sure have had to take drug tests that you represent. They can't show up to work drunk. They get, like it's my right. I should be able, if I want to go drink and smoke weed on my off time, but you can't operate a machine. You can't be a cop. You can't be a firefighter.
Yeah. And that's between you and your employer. I mean, that should be between you and your employer. I mean, if my wife said, like, I'm not comfortable with you being around if you're not vaccinated, that's between me and my wife. But the government has no right to put things in my body. It has none. There's a Supreme Court case, and people are going to bring this up somewhere, which said that you could mandate a vaccine. This is like 100 years ago. But the mandate was a $5 fine if you didn't get it. So the guy they upheld that he had to pay a fine. They didn't uphold that he can't go to work. They didn't uphold that he can't go to the gym or eat. And the other thing that I didn't get a chance to bring up, eventually everyone, or mostly everyone, will be vaccinated, and all my spewing about, disparities between socioeconomic groups will be gone, or we won't care about COVID all that much. But what we have established here is that when you go to a restaurant, you scan your phone and you're showing people where you are. And they have essentially instituted a citywide tracking system in the name of public health. And you know very well that, in the name of health or safety, if they give them an inch, they will take a mile. And I feel that here in New York, they've already taken a mile. And I don't know what else they're going to do after that. But we literally have a digital tracking system for any time we go out, anytime we go to the gym. You think Facebook is bad, you can delete it. But you can't go out without this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that might be. I mean, in other places in California, Hawaii, other places, you just have to show a copy of your card. You don't have to do some check-in system. So that's a valid issue. But if you do have a smartphone, they can track you anywhere.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But you can do that here too for now. But you forget it. Oh, you get the app. Everyone's encouraging you to download the app. I got multiple text messages the other day being like, "Have you downloaded the app yet and uploaded your vaccine status?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't go out to eat." But
what do you say then to the New York? I mean, New York got hit so hard. All the people that died there, all the healthcare workers that were like, if everyone's vaccinated, we could get through this. What do you say about all the hospitals that were overrun just recently, August, September, October?
Yeah, during those times, 85% of adults were vaccinated. I mean, it doesn't make.
But the hospitals were overrun with unvaccinated people.
Well, they were overrun because at that exact time in September and October is when they started firing people. There's a great chart the other day where it showed number of beds in hospitals and number of occupied beds, and then it was number of staffed beds. And it all, right when the number of staffed beds jumped down was September, October, when they started laying off unvaccinated healthcare workers. I know people personally who are healthcare workers in New York and held out very long time to get vaccinated because they had COVID twice already. And I know there are studies that says that natural immunity isn't as strong or it's stronger. Whatever the issue is, they didn't feel that they needed a vaccine to a disease they had already had. And that was it. And they ended up getting it. But if they had been a little bit worried about it, or maybe they had just heard some misinformation and they hadn't, they would have been fired. And then we would have one less nurse to take care of the people who actually need it.
But again, they've required healthcare people to get the flu vaccine constantly. Like to work on a flu ward, you have to get the flu vaccine. So this vaccine mandate, everyone acts like this has never happened before. They've been requiring mandates for healthcare workers for a long time. They've had vaccine mandates in schools for decades. There's a vaccine passport that I had 20 years ago. If I went to a third world country, that I had to show proof of a yellow fever vaccine, and I took malaria pills to get back into this country.
Yeah, and that's another nation, saying that and I know you give another example and I'll address those, but that's another nation saying you can't come in unless you have this.
No. That's the United States saying, if you go into these places and come back to the US, we want to show proof that you're vaccinated so you don't bring the yellow fever back here.
I don't know those laws, so I won't comment too much, but it sounds like I don't like them. I mean, they make sense. A lot of laws make sense until you realize how the enforcement actually happens. It makes sense to say that we should outlaw heroin. Heroin's really bad for you. I don't know anyone who's done it and been better off for it. But when you ban heroin, the consequences are far, far worse. Putting people in cages is far, far worse than them being addicted to a drug. Making people lifetime criminals is far, far worse than being addicted to a drug. So there's many things that would be good, that would help people if everyone did it or didn't do it. But that doesn't mean that the government should be mandating it.
But then all the countries with high vaccination rates that had low hospitalizations, how do we address that? But
So I don't have the data in front of me. I was on the understanding that Israel was having a big breakout and they're the most boosted of all of them. But I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a numbers guy. I mean, that's why I became a lawyer.
okay.
But I'm taking a moral stance, at least in my mind, which is that you, the government, who I signed no contract with, and you have no reason to be able to tell me what to put in my body, should not be allowed to tell me what to put in my body, whether it's something that I must put in my body or something that I may not put in my body. If I'm not harming anybody else, then it's none of your business. Now,
the government isn't demanding that you do it. They're just saying you can't work in certain places or go to certain places. So you can, like we did this with cigarettes. Cigarettes used to be able to smoke. I'm old enough. I worked in you used to be able to smoke on planes. And that's insane, right? That was crazy. That they proved secondhand smoke can cause cancer, and the tobacco lobby fought this, and finally the government stepped in and mandated that you can't smoke because your habit is making it unsafe for me. So your unvaccination is making it less safe for me.
So let's assume that's true. Because again, I haven't had a chance to read the details of the studies. I'm taking more of a political stance on this, which is that I don't believe the government can do XYZ, so they shouldn't do XYZ. I'm vaccinated. I encourage people who are at risk to get vaccinated. That doesn't include children. It doesn't include most healthy young adults, but it probably includes most people in the country. They probably should, and I encourage them to. But that the moment you start forcing it, you're going to get knee-jerk reactions from a lot of people, very similar to me. You're going to say, no, fuck you. Like the moment it's mandated, I'm not going to do it. And I would say that probably accounts for most people. I would say that most people who are resisting the mandates are either so brainwashed by Trump derangement syndrome or Biden derangement syndrome, and they hate one or the other so much, and they blame one or the other for making the vaccine, that they're just not going to do it. It becomes so politicized. And it doesn't need to be politicized. Just take the politics out of it. Here's the data. Here's the vaccine. Get it if you want it. Most people will do it. And most people did do it. I mean, I even did it. And I am the type of knee-jerk guy who, when the government says do something, I say no. And then I kind of think it through and calm down. So that was me at first. It absolutely was. And there are people who are more pig-headed than me. And sometimes I applaud them and sometimes I don't. They probably should get vaccinated, but it's their right not to. And if I know who in my friend circle is vaccinated or not, everyone loves talking about it. And so if I'm afraid of someone who's not vaccinated, I'm not going to go hang out with them. And if you're so afraid of the 10% of adults, not you personally, but if you're so afraid of the 10% of adults who aren't vaccinated, at least in the city, don't go out to eat. Don't ride on the subway. I mean, or do it at an off time.
Now you're restricting my rights.
No, you're making that choice. You're making a calculation of risk. I make calculations of risk every day. And I will just add, before everyone calls me crazy, in January 2020, I had just gotten back from China with my wife. We had gone there December into January. We came back and we said, everyone should be buying masks right now. And then Dr. Fauci came on TV and said, don't wear a mask. And he said that for 3 months until April or May. And we were telling her, you should have masks, you should stock up on them. This is coming. And all anyone was doing was watching the Trump impeachment trial, which when I had left 3.5 weeks earlier had just started. And I assumed, I'm like, oh, the firewall is going to be great. I won't have to watch any of this crap. And then I came home and we were just talking politics. So by the time COVID really hit, it was immediately political. Because we were in this heated political debate, Trump versus everyone else. And it immediately became political. And it drove people apart. And Trump obviously didn't help. But neither did his opponents. And neither did the people with, the good reason to hate Trump. But there's also many irrational reasons to hate Trump. And a lot of people showed those. And I think it really hurt the attempt to stop it from getting here, because we would have locked the borders much, much earlier, would have had a much, much slower spread. We probably could have had vaccines ready before it actually got on a massive scale. If anyone had been paying attention in
locking the borders is restricting people's movements.
So we were talking about emergencies. That's one that Trump could have done. Now, it's not what I would do as president, but I'm not running for president. So I don't have to answer the question.
Yeah, I mean, these are obviously the politicization is why it's so divided in this country. And if it wasn't so politicized, I mean, you had Joyanne Reid on Twitter when Trump was in office, and Trump said, I'm going to have 100 million people vaccinated by the end of the year. And she was on Twitter like, no way, man, I ain't taking your crazy vaccine. And then Joe Biden gets in office and she's like, everyone should be vaccinated. So there's the corporate media on all sides, Fox and MSNBC, they're all part of this problem. Yeah. So my point is, take the politics out of it. vaccine mandates make sense for all of our public safety. Because the anti-mandate people and the anti-vaccine people, all I hear them say is me, me, me. And this is a once in 100-year pandemic. So then I hear people say, oh, just let natural immunity do it. Okay, natural immunity means we let all the vulnerable people, everybody gets COVID, the vulnerable people all die, and then us healthy younger people, then we live.
So part of the reason that I push back, not just on at my moral level, but also on a practical level, is that we're past that point. Like, we're so far past it. You get the flu vaccine before flu season, right? We're past COVID season. It has spread. It is everywhere. The most vulnerable people who are old people in nursing homes, and it has gone through all of them. There's not a single one. Maybe there's one. Don't quote me on that. But we're past the point where vaccination is the best answer. Vaccination is still a great answer and will still help. And that's, I have it in my body. So I'm not saying don't go get vaccinated, but I will always fear the government more than any individual. And I will always fear the government more than any individual disease. And I would probably have a harder time arguing it with a straight face, but I've said before that even if the disease was 100% fatal and the vaccine was 100% effective, you'd be an idiot not to take it, but it's still wrong for the government to force you to take it.
Yeah, liberty or death, I guess. Just choosing the death over.
I mean, I think you should have the right to kill yourself too. I mean, that's one thing. I don't encourage you to, or anybody, and you should call a hotline. But I don't see that's why it's not right. The thing that got me into being afraid of the government, the thing that made me the crazy person that I am today, is that in 9th grade I read a book called The Plutonium Files by Eileen Wellsome. It won a Pulitzer Prize, and it was about the fact that the government for decades would just find people in hospitals and inject them with uranium and plutonium, just to see what would happen. Some people who are on the verge of death, some people that were perfectly healthy. They would give orphans oatmeal laced with radioactive chemicals, all sorts of horrible experimentation that they were doing for decades and decades. The people who were running it were not like fringe scientists. The father of, it's on his Wikipedia, the father of fluoridation of water in America, Harold Hodge, was the guy who also signed off on the inject people directly with uranium and plutonium without their knowledge or consent, just to see if it kills them or not. So
I think this is a little off topic.
but if those people were injected without their consent, and I think we all agree that it's not okay to inject people with something without their consent. Now, in this case, we knew it was harmful.
Again, the viruses don't give a shit what your politics are. They don't care. They find hosts. That's all they care. That's all they did. They find hosts, and unvaccinated people make better hosts. So it's allowed the disease to mutate more, and it has put us all more at risk. And we all, if we had a 90% vaccine rate by July, let's say, everything would be all opened up. I mean, more than likely, that's how that is. So I'm not going to keep going round and round about this because we just don't agree.
Which is okay. I expected to come in here and get a lot more pushback from you. So I'm actually glad that we found a place where we strongly 100% disagree. That's good, because if we didn't disagree, you'd be a libertarian, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is the issue is the anti-vax and anti-mandate people. All I hear them say is me, 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 me. And I don't hear any we talk. I don't hear any I got vaccinated because I'm a Red Cross volunteer and I didn't want to spread it. And I'm in really good health. And I have friends of mine who have some pre-existing condition and I didn't want to put them at risk. So that's the problem I have is just the me, and there's no talking of any of what builds a society, what builds an equitable society. And an equitable society isn't everybody just doing whatever they want. And there's a lot about, and then I've been called by lefty anti-mandate people that I'm a sellout to Big Brother now and whatever else.
I wouldn't even go that far. I mean,
no, I know you're not saying that, but I'm just saying the point here is that there's we need laws and rules to have a society. Currently, they favor the 1%. Which controls both political parties, the Republicans and Democrats. So there's mandates all throughout every day of our life where stuff is forced upon us. And if we don't do it, we can't drive a car. You can't, there's all these things you can't do. And a lot of the public health stuff is for all of our, again, I use the smoking. You want to do heroin? Fine. but there's no secondhand heroin that I ingest when you shoot heroin. I get that when you smoke cigarettes. I get it when you smoke weed. I get it when you get drunk. You want to get drunk and fucking vomit in your own house? I don't give a shit. You get behind the wheel of a car, you are now putting my life at risk for your choices. So that's why there's a mandate for those kind of things to have an equitable society. Like, you can't just go shoot your gun anywhere. Well, if you're in Kenosha, I guess you can. But this is I get that. I don't want the government just putting something in my body. I totally get that. But there's a bigger issue here than just my personal wants and needs. Like, and I had to cancel a tour just past October because the Delta variant spread. And if I lived in a country like Iceland that had 90% vaccine rate, I'd be fine. People always cite Israel. Oh, breakthrough cases. They said from day one that if you get the vaccine, you still can get COVID, but you're less likely, you won't spread it as much, and you won't get hospitalized. The hospital beds, when everyone was full, when unvaccinated people were filling up the hospital beds, you know what that meant? If you had a gallstones, appendicitis, fell down a flight of stairs, there might not be room for you. And that's the other thing that I don't hear the me people talk about. The hospital, this is to keep the numbers down so that if there's a real emergency, a a bus accident, anything like that, then there's room for you. But there wasn't enough room. These beds are full of unvaccinated COVID patients. So
you give the absolute best argument for that position. I mean, it's a hard argument to say, no, you're crazy, you're immoral for saying what you just said. I mean, it's a very convincing argument. I just have to go back to the fact that the government kills more people than anything else, like just throughout history. And what you gave was a perfect argument for why you should get vaccinated. Right, it's a great argument for it. If you stop being fucking selfish, blah blah blah, you're gonna fill up a bed. But the alternative to me is much scarier. And I go back to the comparison to heroin. In fact, I'll take cigarettes from you. Like, if we were really just worried about not filling up hospital beds, we would just ban cigarettes. Like, if banning cigarettes made people stop smoking, then there'd be fewer people smoking, fewer people with emphysema or COPD or heart issues or all the things that cigarettes lead to. We would just ban them. And that's what we've done with a lot of stuff, except it becomes too politically unpopular to actually ban cigarettes. We tried it with alcohol, it didn't work. But yeah, no, I think it's clear this is a place where we respectfully disagree. I think that your opinion is based totally on moral judgments. I just have I think when I balance the harms, balance the fears, it's gonna be the government. And I'm basing it on numbers. I mean, the government's killed more people than COVID.
Sure.
And no, I know it's over time and blah, 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 but you got to watch them. When you give them an inch, they take a mile. Okay.
Well, thank you for your time, Jonathan. Tell our people, if they want to learn more about your campaign, where can they go?
You can go to how2022.com, how2022.com. You can see a big picture of my head on my roof. Or you can go to @JonathanCHowe on Twitter. And that's usually where I do my, my takes on stuff, my opinions on day-to-day events. So again, how2022 or @JonathanCHowe. And Graham, I have been watching you a lot, and I'm really, really honored that you had me on. And I'm sorry I sent you so many emails being like, please have me on. But I'm a politician now, so I have to do that.
Well, I'm glad you're running as a libertarian, because if you're running as a Democrat, I wouldn't have had you on the show. Nope. No matter what your stances are, because no one can reform that party from within. And I'm done with people saying I'm a progressive. You're the first politician I've had on this show in probably
since Michael Weiss.
Yeah, I think so. 1.5 years or something like that. Like, I mean, I think I had Jen Perlman or whatever her name was. I had several progressive Democrats come on my show in 2019, somewhere in there. And after what the Democratic Party has done, Bernie quitting, Tulsi quitting, what the squad has done, I'm done. So I appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate you taking your stands. I appreciate your well thought out positions, even the ones we don't agree on. And I think that's pretty reasonable. So, folks, go to his page. If you live in the 14th district, primarying a member of the squad, I'm all for it because I was a big fan of AOC, but you know, the only power we have is to withhold our vote. It's the only power we have. And the Democratic Party just assumes we're all going to vote for them because they always just say, well, we're lesser of two evils. Well, the lesser of two evils is still evil. And I would rather take a libertarian that doesn't agree with me on mandates over a corporate Democrat.
Yeah. And the problem, just to sum up, is that politics should not be a career. The moment you become a career politician, your incentive is to not fix the problems that you ran on, because you need to run on that again. It worked before, you're going to do it again. And so again, I call on everyone who is running for office to take a pledge to term limit themselves to 2 terms. Do 3 if you want, but I'm doing 2 terms. I love my job and I want to go back to it. So I think this is the thing that we need to start doing. If you're running independent, especially, make a lot of noise about that. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. And thank you again very much for having me on.
Sure, dude. I appreciate you reaching out. Thanks for watching our show, and thanks for your opinion, folks. His website is on the screen. His website is on the screen below. There it is, right over there. It's so check that out. Make your own decisions. And Jonathan, good luck to you, man. And thanks for being a public defender.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, brother. Have a good day.
You too.
Later. Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching. We are still in our 9th month of demonetization from YouTube. So support what we're doing at patreon.com/Graham Elwood or rockfin.com/Graham Elwood, which is a blockchain cryptocurrency platform. It's free to sign up, and there's a premium level at $10 a month. And for that, you get everybody on the platform's premium content. Myself, Lee Camp, Ron Placone, Jimmy Dore, Whitney Webb, Kim Iverson, Abby Martin, and many, many others. You can also support what we're doing at Venmo at Graham-Elwood. And go to GrahamElwood.com. We have a PayPal button and a PO box. I also have crypto wallets, which are all in the show notes. Thanks for supporting what we do.